From Walt Disney Pictures, the Lion King has been robbed of his throne.
Are you nuts?
And now he's lost in the jungle, where the only law of nature is eat.
Ooh, the little cream filled kind.
Or be eaten.
Make mine a Cub sandwich.
And the only way to survive
Hey, I got it.
is to make friends with the biggest guys on the block.
They call me Mr. Pig!
Only in theaters, The Lion King, rated G.
Carnivores.
Starts Friday, June 24th.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast as part of From the Q's podcasting network. As always, I am Jerome Cuson. Please leave a 4 or 5 star review on Apple or Spotify to get the algorithms going in a positive way. Please like and subscribe if you are on YouTube. All of the links to our social media can be found below in the description in our YouTube video and in the podcast write-up. Today, we are going to be discussing the 30th anniversary of the Lion King animated movie. We're going to probably allude to some of the other Lion King media that has come out since, but most of our conversation is going to be focused on the Lion King. As some of you may already know, Ben Phillips and I have been discussing and ranking all 62 theatrically released Disney movies. Back in April, our first episode of the year came out, and we discussed the first 20. I mention this because we will be discussing The Lion King on one of our next 2 episodes. This is a 3-part series. The next episode coming out in July. Will we discuss The Lion King as part of the middle portion? I don't know, but our conversation tonight is going to be focused on the fact that this is both the 30th anniversary, and we're going to focus on some of the Elton John elements, which I know Brian is very enthusiastic to talk about. And then when Ben and I talk about this movie, we will talk about it within the context of the greater Disney oeuvre as part of the Renaissance. So that is how we're going to split these conversations, and we will have enough to say about both, especially since I'm going to be a part of both conversations. As always, my co-host is Brian. Brian, this is very exciting stuff for you and I because this hits our sweet spot. I was 8. I just turned 9 years old. I saw this movie in theaters. It is one of the better theatrical experiences I can remember as a child. But I know that this movie also hit that sweet spot for you as well.
Yeah, it's only fitting that we open this episode up by explaining or giving a background as to, when we first saw this movie for the first time in theaters, both of us. I was 5 years old, I calculated, because this was 2 months before my birthday in '94, and this was quite the experience for me. I remember it quite well. I remember the popcorn. I remember sitting. I think I was on the left side of the left aisle, like 3rd or 4th row at the Parthenia Theater that's no longer there in the Valley. So yeah, just a lot of memories come flooding back, especially when I talk about this with my mom. She always remembers that day too, and how like she was crying in the theater because it was so beautiful. So yeah, that opening shot or the opening sequence of this movie is what sucks everybody in. And from the very first 2 minutes with that great opening with the Circle of Life, it's just like, okay, we're in. Because I don't think any Disney movie has this strong as opening or as stronger than as opening as that to this day. Like I'm talking even Pixar, whatever, like anything Disney produced, that is the greatest opening 2 minutes in the history of any Disney product ever. And like, it's just so astonishing to me that the time and effort that this movie took, like this movie was in production for like 5 or 6 years, and they really wanted to get the scripts right. And they talk about a lot about archetypes, and it's really interesting because like you see a lot of like parallels to other archetypal stories throughout cultures, different cultures. They talk about David, right, and Abraham, right, and of course a little bit of the Moses in there, and then you throw in the Shakespearean aspects to it once they started realizing, oh shoot, we changed the bad guy into a brother character. Now that becomes this whole thing about Hamlet. So there's all these different elements coming to it, and then plus the amazing colors and the amazing animation for 2D. Like, they just took their time with this one. Like, they really took their time, and they released it at the right time, because this was at the height of that Disney Renaissance you were mentioning earlier. People would argue it kind of starts with Oliver and Company, but I would say it starts with Little Mermaid, right? And then Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. And this kind of like tops it off. Like, this is kind of like the WrestleMania 3, so to speak, of that Renaissance. And it just hit the right time, man. And then 94 is now known as this incredible year of movies that everyone's looking back at now with all these articles coming out. And of course, we're talking about it now for its 30th anniversary. But that summer was really like, I remember that a lot because I was going to summer camp right after that. And we had a field trip to the movies, and we had a choice between Angels in the Outfield and Lion King, and I'd already seen both. So I saw I chose to watch Angels in the Outfield again, right? But because of the timing, I got to see the Lion King's last 30 minutes on the other, in the other group. So I got to see that. So that was pretty cool, man. I remember that day a lot, and that summer a lot, and we had to walk to the theater from the church. So there's a lot going on that summer. And of course, there's no baseball that summer, and we're going to get into that as well, considering there's like 4 baseball movies that came out that year, which is I think the most in any other year. So there was just 94 was just like a crazy time, considering that I look back now, and it's not just the family movies that came out that year, but you're talking about a Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump. These crazy like achievements in movie making came out that year, and just going back and looking at it, it's like, oh my God, like 94 was this incredible run of movies, and I think it's like top tier in terms of like the greatest years of filmmaking ever.
Yeah, you've also got things like Shawshank Redemption, Clerks, Heavenly Creatures. I mean, we're talking about just a cavalcade of great movies. I would say 1976, 1994, 1999. Those are probably your top tier. 1939. I'm sure there are others that we can make a note of as well, but those are definitely the most notable years in the history of American cinema, anyway. And just to experience all of that as a 9-year-old, you really can only appreciate a limited sample size. But as you get older and you watch the Forrest Gumps and you watch Shawshanks, and then you kind of dive a little bit deeper and get into the Clerks and Dazed and Confused and some of the more indie movies, then things get a little bit different, and you just realize just the depth that was in 1994. But I would definitely agree with you. Angels in the Outfield was a big deal because any baseball movie would be at that point because of the strike. And not to mention 1994, you have the O.J. Simpson trial, which was such a big deal. The majority of the trial was in 95, but obviously the chase during the NBA Finals was a huge deal, and everything that surrounded the pop culture happenings. It's pretty fascinating to me just how all of that is a backdrop, and then you've got this great run of movies coming out throughout the entire year. But in terms of the Lion King, the animated version, we're talking about just an unbelievable ensemble of people. You're talking about Matthew Broderick, James Earl Jones, Jeremy Irons, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, Nathan Lane, Whoopi Goldberg, Keith Marin, Rowan Atkinson, not to mention composers, Elton John, and you've got Tim Rice, and you've got a score by Hans Zimmer. I mean,
Jim F. and Cummings. Give the man respect for being how many voices on Winnie the Pooh and all these different characters, and yeah, and all he had to do was laugh.
Pretty much, but yeah, I mean, he's definitely a part of this as well, and just the incredible animation. And I don't know if you remember, the first trailer was just the opening, a couple minutes of the movie, which you just don't see anymore. Every trailer just feels so generic. It feels very much the same. Something like this, even the 2019 movie, like the original trailer was just the opening minute because they were trying to recapture that, and it's obviously not the same. But that opening sequence just really sets the tone, and I mean, it's like its own incredible 4-minute short movie by itself. and then you kind of get into the story, and you just got a wonderful group of songs. And I think Beauty and the Beast probably has the best music, I would say. But there are a lot of bangers in The Lion King as well. I think just in terms of, you've got Circle of Life, you've got I Can't Wait to Be King. I mean, just some really good songs. You've got Hakuna Matata. I mean, it's unbelievable to think of just the talent that's involved, and just to really think about the fact that this is coming out when we're 9 years old, and you're a little bit younger, but this is prime time for us. And I mean, look, are we biased? Is that why we love this movie so much? Possibly. It came out at the right time. But even 30 years later, there are some kids' movies that do not hold up. This movie absolutely holds up, in my view. I just think that the storytelling is, I mean, you're talking about kind of Disney at its zenith. You've got the incredible visuals as well. I mean, this movie it works on just about every level. I have very few critiques of it, because I just think they pretty much nailed it, from the voice cast to the visuals to the music.
Yeah, in terms of the casting, I would say that Jeremy Irons is like the unsung hero of this movie. And I know everyone goes to, James Earl Jones and being Mufasa, and we mentioned him during Field of Dreams about he's perfect casting for the right roles in certain movies, and this is certainly, I mean, it's made fun of in every single piece of media that I could think of, like this iconic visual of Mufasa in the sky. It's become so iconic and just beautiful. But something about Jeremy Irons in this movie, where he's singing the songs and he's got he sings the diabolical tone that the song needs to be. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think a different actor would have been just like, put someone else in there, put a real singer in there. I don't want to sing the song. But Jeremy Irons went in there and sang the song, and he sang it with like that evil, maniacal like tone that, oh man, Be Prepared is one of those chilling songs, but it's got a groove to it. But if you listen to the lyrics, it's very much that dark song that it needs to be, to give you that background of to how evil this son of a bitch Scar is, man. So I think Jeremy Irons is incredible in this role, especially like, I know they purposely animated the Hamlet stuff, right, with him holding the skull, having that discussion, but like, he just fits it, because I mean, he's just, I can't remember if he's a stage actor or play actor or whatever, but he's very much capable of nailing these like Shakespearean-esque lines, you know what I'm saying? And Jeremy Irons is such a talented dude. Like, this is after I think he played his own twin in that movie, which is I've looked it up, it's very twisted, but he does play his own evil twin. So he's got that in him to play that evil darkness while also being like a naive kind of babyface character if he has to. But man, when he is the evil guy in a movie, he is so good. Like, even, I know he's not even on screen, right? And you can just look at the guy, and he can easily play an on-screen villain easily. But just for him to be this voice actor and to carry that song the way he does, man, it's incredible. And then, of course, just leading on to some of the dialogue later on, and how he elevates the tone in certain scenes, and he adds to the drama, I think, to this movie so well. I think he adds that certain class that I think a different actor not have brought it. Maybe if you got like a Raul Julia or something like that, but I don't know. He just brings this class to the role where it's almost like it's Shakespeare. He brings that Shakespearean element to it, it feels like. So I know a lot of people love James Earl Jones in his role as Mufasa, and it's iconic and whatever, but I just felt like, man, Jeremy Irons was always the man of this movie for me. And I think Jonathan Taylor Thomas is so lucky that he got this role, because I feel like he's just been coasting from this and then Home Improvement, and he's just been done. He didn't want to do anything else, and that's fine. But man, like, I feel like what a legacy to have, and just kind of mooch off of one role. Like, I mean, I guess everyone's gonna remember him from Home Improvement, obviously, but they even made fun of him on Home Improvement, saying they gave him a line when he was talking about like lions and stuff, and he goes, "And I'm the Lion King," and everyone in the audience just popped for that line. So there's something to that. But yeah, I think the casting's great. I think Matthew Broderick actually does a great job too. But I can only imagine. I could just imagine Michael J. Fox in the role as Simba, just knocking it even further out of the park and making the movie an 11 out of 10, because my God, he would have brought even more emotion to the role, even though Matthew Broderick brings it. Especially that's the scene with, Rafiki, and then seeing his father in the reflection, and then seeing his father in the sky. That's incredible stuff, like iconic. To see that as a kid is very, like, it sticks with you, especially like as you get older and you lose older loved ones. You know what I'm saying? That's a very, I mean, it's really hard to talk to kids about death, and this movie deals with that. So it's just so like it's very mature. It's so much more for kids too at the same time, but it just feels like they got all these elements together to make it this incredible masterpiece. And I think the voice acting is excellent. Even Whoopi Goldberg like doesn't have to steal the show like she does in Ghost. You know what I'm saying? She can just be the side character and just have fun with the role. And even Cheech Marin is having fun with the role too. So it's like they just got all these actors for the right roles. And then I mentioned, of course, Jim Cummings, who just had to laugh in that maniacal way. That's all he had to do is that hyena. So yeah, they just did a great job.
Well, I guess you did think Be Prepared. It's been there's some discussion, but I guess Jim Cummings is actually the one who did the singing of Be Prepared.
I don't know about that because I can hear like they can say he sang part of the background, I think, but I can tell Jeremy Irons has that accent. You know what I'm saying? You can hear it, but if that's what you say, I don't know because didn't he perform it live too? I could have sworn he performed it live.
I mean,
at the
he
Oscars.
did perform it live. I mean, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he did it in the movie. I mean, I think he did a fine job of performing it live. But I mean, the point is that it's one of the better villain songs that we've had. I think people will always point to Ursula in The Little Mermaid. It's weird to me that Jafar really doesn't have a song.
Did they give him a song in the sequel and we forget that? I don't know. I mean, I feel like he got some love in the second one.
The sequel's a sequel, though. It's not. It's a little bit different when you're comparing the original.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's a VHS thing too, and I get you. It's just, yeah, I think Ursula's like another one that you obviously remember, but I think this is just the iconic go-to version. And I can't even think of another villain song, right? It's like he's the number one on the list, and it's like it's hard to top it because, like I said, it sets the tone for the background of his character, and that's kind of what you needed to know, that he's an evil son of a bitch, and it leads right into the death of Mufasa right after that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of some of the other parts of this movie that I think work out so well, I think the chemistry between Timon and Pumba is really important because, on the one hand, they're kind of these comedic figures, and they're definitely designed to kind of lighten the mood because, especially at the point when Mufasa dies, things are extremely heavy, and you really have to find a way to just bring in some levity, and I think they do that. And I've always been a fan of Nathan Lane's performance as Timon, and really just both actors, I think, do a really, really good job.
Okay, yeah, Nathan Lane, I think, is an underrated performer because I love him in The Birdcage. Absolutely love him in The Birdcage. I saw that movie when I was a kid, and it just stuck with me. You know what I mean? And that kind of taught me about gay relationships and gay rights and how a gay relationship works. So that was kind of eye-opening. And I always thought Nathan Lane was like this great actor that kind of portrayed that lifestyle in a proper way and not so over the top. And then like finding out that he was Timon. You know what I mean? Like it just made sense that like I don't know. He seems such a like uplifting performer when he gets into a role. Like if you ever watch Mouse Hunt, like he's like he feels like he's in a different movie sometimes in that movie, but it just fits because he knows how to make a kids movie. It's like he knows the right beats and tones for a kids movie, and he just nails it. And I think that's why he had success in Mouse Hunt. So, and other kids movies as well. But what are they called? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They've been compared to C-3PO and R2-D2, right? Like it's this idea that we have like two, whether it's male or female or whatever, buddies that the main character meets halfway through the movie, Jay and Silent Bob and Dogma, right? And then they kind of become friends with the protagonist, and they kind of cheer him up, So that's kind of what this roles are, and you see these roles in a lot of different movies, like I mentioned already. But they just at the right time nailed that comedy, because right when Hakuna Matata comes in, everything just seems like okay, everything's gonna be better now because it's just so uplifting. And then of course Hakuna Matata, I didn't even realize as a kid, influenced my thinking in terms of like I guess life philosophy, right? I say the phrase "no worries" a lot. Like almost every day, I'll refer to like say it to someone at work, my friends, and texts. I'm pretty sure I've sent Jerome some "no worries" text before, and I just never realized where it came from until like years ago when I realized, oh shit, I'm quoting the Lion King every time I say that. No worries, Hakuna Matata, and it just stuck with me. And I guess it just like stuck with me as a kid because I've been saying that phrase like all my life in terms of like no worries, don't worry about it. So it's just crazy to me that it just influenced my thinking as a kid, and I didn't even realize until recently. You know what I'm saying? So that's the power of a movie like this, where it can kind of change your thinking as a kid and kind of like influence you. And then of course there's this idea of within the Hakuna Matata song, it's like, do you just kind of settle for being you know passive and just kind of settling for what life gives you, or do you strive to do whatever that your destiny wants you to fulfill? Like, do you want to be a leader or not, right? Like, you're destined to be a leader, but he doesn't want to be a leader at the moment. I totally relate to that because I've been told, like, you'd be a great manager, you'd be great this and that. And like, no, I'm cool. I don't want that. I don't want that leadership responsibility. I don't want any of that. Just let me let me Hakuna Matata. Let me just get by and be happy. So I've always told myself I'm kind of stuck in my Hakuna Matata stage, and you never know. I could end up in my Lion King stage down the line. But man, like I would totally relate to this idea of like not accomplishing your potential of being a leader and not wanting to be a leader, even though you're destined to. So I think that's a great, like the way that the Hakuna Matata like symbolizes that in the lyrics of the song.
Yeah, I think the heart of this movie obviously is Simba's journey, and that's really what the movie embraces. And I think it's more adult than people give it credit for. I think that's the other thing is that Disney movies are intended to be for kids, but not just the moment with Mufasa, but just the journey in general. I think is a little bit more mature than with Aladdin and the Little Mermaid. It's much more of a straightforward romance. Like that is their motivation. In this one, there is a romantic element to it, and the end of the movie is we see Simba's child, but it's the romance is much more incidental to everything else that's going on. So I think that makes a kind of a big difference in the tone and just in the way that we feel about some of the different characters, because Simba's much more the object of, okay, is he going to become a king or not, and as opposed to, is he going to get with Nala or not? Like there's some drama with Nala, but again, it's much more in the background of the movie compared to his journey. So I think that's another really fun aspect to the movie, and I think that just really well paced. I think that's the thing about this movie, that every time I watch it, the 90 minutes is just, it feels perfect. Like I feel like if this movie were shorter, I feel like you would lose so much. I feel like if it was even 15 minutes longer, I would just feel like it would not feel, you would not feel the intensity as much. And I think that's the issue with the 2019 movie, is that because it's over 2 hours long and you don't get the facial expressions nearly as well, it feels like much more of a slog. Whereas this movie at 90 minutes, and to me, all Disney movies are perfect at 90 minutes. And I don't know, it feels like we've gotten away from the 90-minute movie. And this, to me, is an example of how you could tell a really good story in 90 minutes and you can still make one of the best movies of the year, or maybe of all time, with this limited amount of time.
I think the new rule is the old hour 45. I think that's the official new rule. It seems like that's what I've noticed. If was 90 or an hour and 45, and I was like, I don't know if I want to watch an hour and 45-minute version of that movie. I think a 90-minute version of If would be much better to watch. But that's the thing, and I think it has to do with the extended time run of the trailers at the beginning. Now, there's a lot of elements to it, and it's very much a a corporate thing now. Because it's very rare that I'll see a 90-minute movie just straight up 90 minutes in the theater anymore, unless it's like a horror movie and that's it. I feel like horror movies are the ones that can get away with it now. But other than that, like these Disney movies are no longer 90 minutes; they're an hour and 45. I swear to God, like Onward, I remember that was before the pandemic, and I was looking at the runtime and I was like, why is it like an hour and 45? This sounds like it should be a 90-minute movie. And then I look back and it's like this string of like movies that have been coming out that are like hour 45, hour 45. So is what it is. But yeah. And you mentioned earlier Elton John. I wanted to bring him up because not a lot of people realize at this time that like Elton John was in the merge of this comeback, and Lion King really brought him back. Because like in the 80s, like Elton John really didn't have as many hits. He had like I'm Still Standing, the one about the the wedding song he did about the bride. Like there's like 4 or 5 hits compared to the 70s where he had like a dozen or so or something like that, right? So obviously he was on a downturn. And at this time, like he was really heavily into drugs, and then he got out of it. Like I think his first album, sober, he says, is like 1991, right? So once he gets sober, Disney's, they're looking to, for people to make the songs. They see Elton John's available. Elton John was like, okay, this is kind of like the right project for me, right? I'm going to do this family Disney movie. I'm sober now. I'm trying to get my life back together. And all of a sudden, just things click at the right time. And boom, he makes this album and it wins all these Grammys. He wins an Oscar. And he's talked about this on an interview that I just watched, that like he really cherishes the Oscar more than the Grammy. Because, I mean, as an artist, as a kid, like obviously, if you're not in movies, you don't, you're not going to dream about winning an Oscar as a musician, right? But he won it, and he was just like, I never thought I would ever win this. You know what I mean? And he's just like, I was just in shock for days because I grew up as a kid, thinking like I would probably win a Grammy or two, right? But never an Oscar. So it's just truly amazing, like how this kind of like was that, like we mentioned before, Disney was coming out of their own, hole and in the merge of their big comeback, and this kind of topped it all off. And this was like Elton John's big comeback for that. And if you look at the numbers, he had like "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" really got a lot of airplay, and that really brought him back into the top 40. He hadn't been in the top 40 in a while. And the reason I know this is because I've been listening to a lot of top 40 radio from that era with Casey Kasem, and kind of like listening to his numbers and breakdowns, because he had so much success in the 70s. You have no idea like how crazy successful Elton John was in the 70s. And the 80s is kind of was like half of the success because of the drug use, right? But once he got out of that, it was just like the 90s was different for him, especially because he also had vocal surgery, which not a lot of people realize. But once you obviously go back into his catalog, you can hear it because he's such a different singer in the 70s and 80s than he was in the 90s. His voice got deeper and his sound completely changed after that. So I don't think the soundtrack would be as good if he didn't have the surgery, to be honest, because now like 90s Elton John is known for his bluesy, deeper songs. And that's what kind of like the soundtrack was going into, especially with "Can You Feel the Love Tonight." So I think this was just the perfect like storm for Disney, the music industry, with Elton John coming back, because he is such an important figure in the music industry. People don't realize how much money he makes for radio stations and records and music producers. He is such a popular act. And then after that, Princess Diana died, and they remade his song "Candle in the Wind," which we all know. And that was another major hit. So there was just these string of hits right after Lion King that just helped Elton John's career to just make a full comeback. So it is just crazy to think that if you kind of, I know a lot of people picked up on this when they first saw it, but people don't even realize it now sometimes, is that the Lion King soundtrack is in the background of Toy Story at the end. So, there's just, I think the Lion King soundtrack is probably the most iconic soundtrack in the history of Disney, followed by either Frozen or Beauty and the Beast.
I mean, Beauty and the Beast is pretty spectacular. I think the fact, and I think this is colored by the fact that we watched the Academy Awards from 1992, and 3 songs are performed and were nominated. So it's really hard for me to separate. I would definitely say Frozen, I feel like Let It Go is the big song. I don't know that the others have kind of reached the cultural cachet, even though maybe Building a Snowman to an extent also has, but I don't know. It's hard for me to say because I'm obviously older when Frozen came out, so I don't have that like the earworm part of it, and I'm not like streaming it on Spotify and Apple Music all the time, as I'm sure many kids do these days, and have done for the last 10 years or so since it came out. But you mentioned Elton John. Something else that has to be noted about Elton John is that while this was definitely a comeback and definitely elevated him, what brought him into the stratosphere was after the death of Princess Diana, him performing "Candle in the Wind" at her funeral, and that became one of the largest selling singles of all time. And that is what really elevated Elton John into the stratosphere and almost this ubiquitous quality of just understanding and knowing who Elton John was. So I would definitely agree with you that this was part of his comeback. But I think what really brought him over the top almost was Candle in the Wind.
Yeah, which is again, like I said, like he reworded it just for Diana. And have you ever seen that performance, guys? Jesus Christ, it's like that was like
I
almost
remember being 12 years old, and I remember it
it
definitely
felt like the death of the '90s, but it wasn't quite over yet. That's what it kind of felt like to me. I don't know. Looking back at it,
it's definitely one of those moments where it feels like it. Anyway.
yeah, especially considering how big Princess Diana was as like this pop culture figure, just being a divorcee to a shitty prince. So that's a whole other discussion for another podcast. Because I mean, Princess Diana is one of those iconic figures throughout time that you can't help but just remember. You know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, and one thing I also wanted to mention is Rafiki. I always felt Rafiki now is like this Jedi character that was a Jedi before. We were just kind of like noticing these things because like he's clearly speaking in like Jedi speak. It feels like it.
He very much has. He's a lot of. It feels very similar to Yoda in many ways.
And of course, with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes that came out, that orangutan character that was that spiritual kind of pseudo leader, right? That felt like that Rafiki, trope or trope kind of character. I don't know if it's a trope now, but it's always that. Every movie has that, spiritual, like, advisor kind of character, right? Obi-Wan Kenobi, whatever. But I felt like this was just one of those that, like, really sticks with you as a kid. You know what I mean? Like, I think the philosophy behind the Rafiki character is kind of this beautiful interpretation of life and the circle of life and how death shouldn't, like, hold you back and, your past shouldn't define you kind of thing. And that whole sequence with him and Simba is just, I think, really a life lesson for a lot of young kids that can take a lot of good lessons from that. I hope I did, because I feel like, growing up, it's like you got to let go of your past. And it kind of ties in with that Rocky quote, keep moving forward, right? So all these different things about life that kind of shape me kind of come from these movies. But man, it's true. Like with Rocky, you got to keep moving forward no matter what. And, like Rafiki says, you can't just focus on your past all the time. You have to keep moving forward as well. So I think that Rafiki character is tremendous. I almost wanted like a short movie about him, like just to give more Rafiki, but they didn't do that with the sequels, as we'll mention. But
you say that, but there is going to be a live action sequel, and I believe Rafiki is going to be either telling a story or will be part of it. So in terms of the animated universe, we don't have it, but we are definitely going to get something with this live action sequel. And look, the only reason that I even can manifest any enthusiasm or potential for it is because Barry Jenkins is the one that's directing it. If this was Jon Favreau returning to the directing chair for this movie, it would just be a big old bag of who cares. Barry Jenkins is somebody that is worth definitely considering, even if, regardless of what you think of this sequel and the live action nature and the cynicism surrounding all of these live action Disney movies recently, Barry Jenkins is someone that's very critical, and I will be very curious to see what he has to say and what he has to add to Mufasa as a character, because it appears to be there are going to be both prequel and sequel elements, with I guess the majority of the story focusing on Mufasa as a young cub.
Yeah, we'll see. Because listen, I watched that Lion King remake in theaters, and I was like okay with it. You know what I'm saying? Like I wasn't like full of hatred for it. You know what I'm saying? And despite all these criticisms of all these Disney live action movies, especially like Lion King, people had made like $1 billion. So despite all this complaining, it's like you're still supporting the movie and kind of proving the producers right when you say these things. So
say that, but I want to point out that The Little Mermaid definitely did not do good business. Mulan, I mean, it's tough to say because that was kind of a pandemic Disney Plus release. I don't necessarily know if you can count that. I just don't know how many more legs some of these movies have. We'll see. December is very light in terms of movie releases. I believe this Lion King sequel is the biggest movie. We don't have a Star Wars. We don't have an MCU. We don't have an Avatar. So that is really the big movie of December, and it's probably going to have to carry through Christmas. And I think that will be a telltale sign. And I think so much of it is going to have to do with the quality of it as well. And again, Barry Jenkins is somebody who can elevate this into something worthwhile. But we'll have to see. I mean, this has been It's been a struggle at the box office this year. Bad Boys 4 has kind of rejuvenated things a little bit, but one movie does not a year make. It's been a real struggle, both in terms of box office and in terms of quality. There's been a lot of real bad stuff that's been released, for sure.
Yeah, it's we'll see, because I think Barry Jenkins is obviously quality talented director. I was very shocked when he took the job. Like, I thought no one would want to take this job. But maybe he figured it out, because the main criticism, I think, was the lack of emotional, characteristics of the face. So let's see if he can figure it out, because I don't know. I mean, if you don't fix that, then what are you doing? It's like that's the number one issue that everyone had, it seems like. So because based on the trailer, it doesn't seem they've addressed that issue. But I hope that they change things up and give him more of an animated style of facial expression. And I get they want the realism, but I don't know. It just takes away from it. So that's kind of the issue when you're doing live animals. It's like if you look at a Homeward Bound, right? That old school Disney movie. That was just 3 characters, not everyone was an animal in that movie, and it worked. But in this case, that's why that first Lion King was kind of like to a lot of people. So that's my worry, is that they didn't even learn the lesson from the first one and just kind of went, oh, we'll just put a good director in there and that'll fix it. So we'll see on that one. But I think that kind of wraps up our discussion for Lion King pretty much. I think we're both in agreement that's like a 10 out of 10 all-time classic, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is as good of a movie as we'll discuss in our podcast run.
Yeah, and I mean, there is Lion King 1.5, which I like some of it, not all of it. It does tie into a lot of the key scenes and kind of intertwines with some of the scenes in Lion King 1, which is really cool.
It's Timon and Pumba heavy is kind of the gimmick of the movie.
Yeah, and the second one is obviously focused on, Simba and his daughter. But I say that I've only seen it once, and it didn't really click with me at all. But I do think that the soundtrack is incredible.
This movie is Hamlet's Lion King 2 is Romeo and Juliet, so it's kind of funny. They kept the Shakespeare thing going. It's fine. It's definitely better than Return of Jafar. It is not as good as Aladdin, King of Thieves, which, I mean, in terms of those straight to DVD or VHS or home video releases, I mean, I would say Aladdin, Prince of Thieves is at the top of the list. For some reason, I've heard people really put over one of the Cinderella sequels as being really good. Maybe someday we need to do like a run of like Disney sequels that were not released in theaters. But
Honey, We Blew Up the Kid.
That was a
no, wait, sorry, Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. Right?
Yes, I believe that was
that's the one.
Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. I remember seeing that in theaters, if you can believe it.
Wow.
But yeah, that's really all I have to say. I mean, The Lion King is an incredible movie, and we are going to be continuing our summer theme of anniversaries next week. Brian, I know you're excited for this one.
Yeah, because last year when I got my PlayStation, I picked up some old movies at Best Buy before they stopped selling movies, and it was the 4K speed copy, and it's the Ultimate Collector's Edition. I haven't even opened it yet. This is the perfect time to do it. I love this movie a lot. I think some of the scenes are not going to be as cool in 4K, but I think some of the bus sequences will look really awesome in 4K, so that's what I'm really looking forward to on this next rewatch. And I know a lot of people give shit to Keanu Reeves in the 90s, but I don't know. I think he's really good in this role, to be honest. Like, it really just clicks for me on how he's like so like frustrated and confused, because he's supposed to be frustrated and confused because he doesn't know what's going on in terms of like why the hell this bus is about to blow up and who put the bomb and all that stuff. And that kind of unveils throughout the movie. But yeah, it's just a great fun ride, and I love this movie a lot. And I actually saw it in theaters like 10 years ago, and then like a double feature with Rush Hour. So seeing it with a theater, like a crowd, like that was really into it. It's really fun too. So it's a lot of great memories, because I didn't watch it in theaters, obviously. I watched it like later on VHS, and a lot of fun. And Sandra Bullock that's kind of like a breakout role. I would say more so than Demolition Man, to be honest. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff about this movie.
This, and then I mean, don't underestimate the Net. The Net was a big deal for her, as much as people could go back and make fun of that movie. It was big for Sandra Bullock.
I didn't see it. I still haven't seen it, but in terms of like that time period, yeah. And we mentioned like Jim Carrey having a monster 94, right? We forget that Jeff Daniels was not only in Dumb and Dumber, but he was a big part of Speed as well. So he had a great summer too. Yeah, just you kind of forget that Jeff Daniels made a lot of money Maybe I hope he made a lot of money that year, but it seems like he was being in two top movies like Speed and Dumb and Dumber at the box office. Like, you got to have made some kind of big check out of that. So good for Jeff Daniels, because I completely forget that he's in both movies in the same year, to be honest. But and we could talk about how unfortunate that Jeff Daniels character gets cut off or killed off in Speed, because I felt like that's such one of the big mistakes of that movie. But we can discuss that next week.
So yes, we will discuss the greatness of Speed, kind of a Die Hard knockoff in so many ways, but in many other ways, it kind of does its own thing, and it does a really good job of executing this this kind of quote unquote Die Hard formula extremely well. For Brian, I am Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
Dun, dun,